All right. Welcome back, everyone, to Eco Evenings. This is our day two. We are here this evening with Sabrina Guzman Skotnitsky. Sabrina is a climate justice advocate, researcher, and youth consultant. She's passionate about reducing the barriers young people face to entering the environmental field, especially BIPOC youth from remote rural communities, newcomers, and youth with disabilities. And my name is Dylan Yates, and I work with the Nova Scotia Environmental Network. And for those who don't know, the Nova Scotia Environmental Network is a not-for-profit organization that was established in 1991 and consists of 30 plus environmental organizations across Nova Scotia, whose common purpose is to conserve and enhance the natural environment and build a sustainable future for Nova Scotia. Before we kick things off and hand things over to Sabrina, I would like to introduce Jeff Ward. Jeff is the general manager of the Membertou Heritage Park, who draws on his vast experience and knowledge in the field of culture, management, and administration. Growing up, he was always involved in community events and has been a leader in their planning, coordination, and participation. When it became time to pursue post-secondary education, the Bachelor of Arts Community Studies program at Cape Breton University was a natural fit. Currently, he is working on his master's degree. As a public figure, Jeff has been dancing, drumming, performing his way into people's hearts since a child. He is currently a member of the Sons of Membertou and Thunder Eagle Singers, most recently performed at the 100th anniversary of Vimy Ridge in France. He also MCs numerous First Nation powwows in the Atlantic region and Eastern USA. Jeff has been a keynote speaker and MC for a variety of conferences, including the most notable being the MMIWG Commission of Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry in Membertou, to name a few. And Jeff has been referred to as Mi'kmaq Knowledge Keeper and Sharer, and we are really excited to have him back this evening to open things up for us. And I'll hand things off to you, Jeff.
Thank you. Thank you. I have to work on a shorter bio, but thank you for your kind words. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land at which we gather on and where we are virtually is traditional unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by treaties of peace and friendship, which the Mi'kmaq, Wolastoq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy people signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with the surrender of lands or resources, but in fact recognized the indigenous title and established the rules for what was going to be an ongoing relationship of peace, friendship, and mutual respect among nations. And two nations with very different modes of land use. We are all treaty people. I like this sacred smudge, this sage, send prayers in all areas, in all directions. Start this evening with a prayer. And it's an old prayer that I guess last night, yesterday, I prayed in our language and I translated for you, but tonight I'm going to do a little different, and I'm going to share a prayer in English for everybody too. Oh great Spirit, whose voice I hear in the wind, for hear me now, I am young, small, and weak. I seek your strength and your wisdom. I seek your strength, O great one, not to be sparing my brothers and sisters, but to conquer my greatest enemy, myself. I seek your wisdom, the wisdom you have hidden in every leaf and rock, so I may learn this message of life and hope and pass it on to my people in a good way. My hands respect the many things you have made. My ears be sharp to hear your voice in the wind, and may my eyes behold the red and purple sunset. So when life fades like that setting sun, my spirit will come to you without shame. Sit Nogama, all my relations, idly edge. One of my elders have taught me, because on this path of spirituality, when I was very young and learning it, I would pray. And once you start praying and realizing that we're related to everything, you tend to pray for a long time. But we could also just say, Imsit Nogama, all my relations. That's a very old word, and it's from our people, Imsit Nogama, all my relations. And coincidentally, Albert Einstein started teaching the theory of relativity when he came over to teach at Princeton. Theory of relativity, unceded, all my relations. I don't know, just saying, he should have cited us. Maybe it was us, I don't know, but just want to share that with you. So it's good to have you here, and thank you. I'm very excited to hear this presentation. Walalio, Sitnogama, Daho.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And we're going to hand things over to Sabrina for her presentation.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That was lovely. And I'll actually include my own land acknowledgement as well, because I am not joining you from Mi'kma'ki. I am currently in Vancouver, which is on the unceded Coast Salish territory of the Musqueam, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, the unceded, unsurrendered and stolen territory. And I have a lot of privilege to be able to live and work here. And always think it's very important to start with these conversations, especially as we know with the climate crisis, that Indigenous peoples are not only at the forefront of this fight against climate crisis, but also those most disproportionately impacted by its effects. So thank you so much, Jeff. I'm just going to go and share my screen so we can start the presentation. And I see that everyone's off camera. Totally okay if you want to do that, but if you do want to turn your camera on and join us visually, you're free to do that. We'll start off a bit with some slides, but then we will go into kind of some breakout conversations. So at that time, feel free to turn on your camera as well. Okay, great. So I'm just going to go presentation mode. Please let us know in the chat if you have any trouble seeing my screen. Does it look like we're good to go, Dylan?
Yeah, you're all good.
Great, awesome. Well, thank you so much, NSCN, for having me. Some folks here might know that I worked for NSCN last summer as Information and Communications Manager, and it was a really great experience. And I'm just very excited to be back in this community. So to give you a bit of background on why I'm even qualified to talk about green jobs, last year I was hired by the Canadian Council for Youth Prosperity to do this research. And CCYP is a national nonprofit who's focused on youth workforce development. And that's kind of just a fancy way of referring to the different supports that need to be put in place to help young people develop skills, find jobs, be able to do interviews, those sort of things, and also help them identify like what are their career goals, like what is their kind of ideal vision for their careers. CCYP did a lot of work in response to COVID-19 and trying to help youth. And my fellowship was basically looking at the federally funded green job programs. And so all of these programs are what we call work learning experiences or wage subsidies. So basically what the government does is they allow employers to hire youth and subsidize a percentage of their wage. So sometimes the government covers the entire wages for the young person. Sometimes it's like half. So this can vary, but these programs specifically allow employers to hire youth to do green jobs or to work in environmental organizations. So over the course of about 7 months, I did a literature review. I interviewed different department agencies in the government, as well as nonprofits who help with these programs. And then I also did a survey, which included 250 plus youth from across Canada. And this was open to any youth who reside in Canada. So they did not have to have a citizenship or permanent residency in order to answer the survey. And when we go through the presentation, I'll kind of share some of the findings from that survey, as well as from the other parts of the research. So all of this has kind of really ignited my passion for green jobs. I published this report in June, and now I've been kind of doing different engagements like this. I've been on a few podcasts, really trying to talk to more people about this and expand like what we think about when we think of green jobs. And this has led to me now being my position with the Emerging Youth Consultancy, where I am the Director of Sustainability and Impact-Driven Work. And one more thing to mention is that I'll be having a big resource list sent out to all of you after the presentation, and that will include a link to the full report if you want to read it in depth. So to start off, I thought it would be great just to hear what you folks think about when you think about a green job. So this could be, titles of green jobs. This could be places people might work if they had a green job. But I would love to hear about that. And I think a great way to do this is to use a Jamboard. So some people might be familiar with this tool. It's like an online whiteboard basically. And it's kind of like if we were meeting in person and you wrote your ideas on a sticky note and you put it on the wall. And so thank you. I see in the chat that we've already added the link to the Jamboard. So basically we're going to go to the Jamboard and I'll show it on my screen as well. And I'll show you how to add your own thoughts. You can also, if you can't use the Jamboard for whatever reason, you can put your ideas in the chat function and one of the volunteers will be able to put it on the Jamboard. Also feel free if you prefer to share verbally, that is totally fine. So we're going to go over to the Jamboard. I see some people have already got on there, which is great. Awesome. So yeah, we'll take about 5 minutes to kind of put ideas. And basically you go to this little toolbar here and you click the little square. And basically you can pick whatever color you want and just type whatever. So for example, a green job, some people might think of like conservation. So then we do save and then you can move it around the board. I see someone's already in there, which is great. And we'll do this for a few different questions throughout the presentation. So don't worry if you don't get a hang of it right away. And also there's no wrong answers for this question, by the way. I see people are getting the hang of it now. Great. I'm glad people are liking this tool because sometimes people are not quite sure how to use it, but this is great. And I find in general, visual tools really help when we're talking about these big issues. Awesome. Well, keep adding on. I'm just going to read out a few of these. So someone has said that a green job is a job with a low environmental or carbon footprint. Someone said a job that would exist in an ideal sustainable world, which is, I love that. Activism and education, sustainability, science and management, renewable energy, building resilient communities. I really like that one too as well. Raising awareness. Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Sophie. That's great participation. I feel like there might be some students here who've had to use this in online classes over the past year since COVID-19 has started. Great. Yeah, I see resource development, environmental engineer, I think was behind here. Awesome. Well, we can definitely come back to this. We're just going to go back to the slides and I'll tell you a little bit about what other folks thought that answered this very same question on my survey. So if we go back here, and one thing to note is if you want to just keep your Jamboard like in a tab, we're going to return to it later. So don't feel like you need to close it, but if you do, we'll resend the link so you can come back to it. Great. So what defines a green job? So the reason that I asked this question was because when I did my research and I talked to different organizations and departments, I asked them how they define a green job, and I realized that a lot of them had different definitions. And some of them did overlap, but some of them were also quite a bit different. And that caused me to go Google. And again, there's a lot of different definitions. And then when I did my survey, I also asked the survey respondents to define it. And so I really love a lot of your answers because they were quite holistic. And that's what I love to see. One of my favorite survey definitions was green jobs are careers that focus on the creation of a more sustainable and just future for all. So this is very similar to what some folks were saying about a better future or towards helping us move towards a more sustainable planet. But basically it's talking about not just the things that directly reduce greenhouse gas emissions or directly contribute to climate action, but anything that kind of can indirectly lead to an environmental benefit or can help us build the society we want in the future as we transition to a low carbon economy. EcoCanada, which is the Environmental Career Organization of Canada, defines the environmental workforce as both those who are directly employed within environmental goods and services, and then those requiring specialized environmental competencies. So basically, this includes both people that have like what we might consider a traditional green background where they might know biology or engineering, but they could work using those skills for a lot of different organizations. Or it could refer to someone that has maybe graphic design background or communications background, but they are working for an environmental organization and helping that organization forward their goals. So for a few more examples, here are some of the roles that I've had in environmental organizations. So as I mentioned on there, you can see my role with NSCN is on there. I've also been a membership model and outreach coordinator for Trips by Transit. So folks in Halifax might be familiar with that organization. And right now I also work for the Youth Climate Lab as an international policy specialist. And the reason that's a green job is because I am working on climate financing and international climate policy. And as I mentioned, you could have a graphic design degree and work for a green organization, and that could be a green job. Another really important thing is fundraising. Pretty much every nonprofit, and especially environmental nonprofits, need to write a lot of grants. They need to do fundraisers. They need to build their membership programs in order to be able to continue the important work they're doing. So all of these roles, whether or not you have quote unquote environmental competencies, you're helping an environmental organization achieve its goal. And so therefore, I believe that that's a green job. So I guess the next point is to ask, why green jobs for youth? So, you know, we have a lot of stuff going on, a lot of different economic priorities, obviously coming out of the COVID-19 health crisis, which is still ongoing. Why should we invest or prioritize green jobs? So in CCYP's research, they found that COVID-19's economic impacts really affected youth disproportionately. So we know that, you know, industries like tourism, like arts and culture, service industry, food and accommodation, those had to get closed down because they were too many people in closed spaces. There was too much risk of COVID-19 exposure. So they faced a lot of closures, especially during the first and second wave. But those are the very same industries where most youth are employed. You know, youth are more often to be your waiter or waitress than older folks. And so when these closures happened, thousands of youth in Canada lost their jobs. And to give like a statistic that I found was really shocking, in the, I think it was the second month of COVID-19 when it hit here, the youth unemployment rate in Canada dropped to the lowest it's been in 20 years. So that's really, you know, stark numbers there. And then why green jobs? Well, we know for one that the climate crisis is looming and that, you know, youth, because we're inheriting the climate crisis, many of us feel very anxious about our futures and like, what are we supposed to do about this? And also, there's actually a real demand in the environmental labor market for more people. Yeah, I see a comment, Autumn. Yeah, it's astonishing, but not surprising at the same time, for sure. Yeah, so when I was talking about the labor market, there's actually going to be a lot of folks retiring. EcoCanada estimates about 30% of the current environmental workforce is going to retire by 2030. And that's almost 200,000 jobs. So there's actually a real urgent demand. And personally, as someone who has experienced climate anxiety, I find that having a green job and being able to take action in my everyday on climate or environmental issues has really helped me feel more empowered and more hopeful about my future. So those are a bunch of reasons why I think green jobs are the way to go. So we're going to go back to the Jamboard. And the next question is, what barriers do you face if you have tried to get a green job, or would you expect to face in trying to enter the environmental fields? So we're going to go back to the Jamboard, and if you need to get the link again, I believe it should be in the chat. Thanks, Sophie. And let us know at any time if you have any questions about what we're doing here. Great. So we're going to go to the second slide, and there is the new board about barriers. So we'll give another few minutes for folks to write. And please, if you could avoid using the pencil, I know it might have been an accident, but if you can just use the sticky notes, that'll be preferred. Thank you. And again, if you're having any trouble using the Jamboard, please feel free to use the chat function in Zoom. People are quick at this. Yeah, it's really interesting to see what folks are saying, because experience was definitely a really big thing that people talked about in my survey, and then also when I've shared this work outside of that. Yeah, I also see government defunding, worried that like your bachelor's might not be enough, you might need a master's degree as well. Severe competition, that's especially true. Well, I feel like that perception is especially true during COVID-19. All jobs requesting experience, being knowledgeable enough, location, diverse skills. Great. So we'll go back to this presentation again, and we'll be back to the Jamboard in a little bit, and you'll still have access to the slides, Jamboard, and my resource list after this. So if you want to add more thoughts or ideas later on, don't worry, you'll still have access. Great, I see one that's talking about disability related things. Despite that jobs say that they are accessible, this is not always the case. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so when I asked youth to let me know how difficult they perceive it is to enter the low carbon field, I gave them the ability to kind of rank it on a scale from not difficult at all to extremely difficult. And the result was quite staggering. Almost 64% ranked it moderately to extremely difficult. And you can see the breakdown on the pie chart there. But definitely the amount of youth that thought it was difficult far outranked those that thought it was easy or accessible to them. I provided a list of common barriers and I asked them to kind of rank in order which one they thought was most relevant to them. And so they're listed there. And as many of you folks have pointed out, not having experience in the green field is the largest barrier. The other thing was around not knowing one who works in the field. So an issue of like, I don't have a network, I don't know someone who could point me to the right job, that sort of thing. And then also, as you folks have pointed out, not having the right degree or accreditation and not being trained in science, technology, engineering, or math. So this last one's quite important because I think a lot of us believe that we need to have a STEM degree in order to have a green job. And that is something that has been part of green job programs as well. For a long time, some of these green job programs, either the employer the job had to have to do with STEM, or from the youth side, the youth had to have a background or degree in STEM. And a lot of these agencies have kind of moved away because they realized this was excluding a lot of people. But I don't think the perception has changed as much. So even though the programs have changed, a lot of people still think, oh, well, that green job program, I can't do it because I don't have a STEM degree. And that's why I think it's really important, especially when we talked about the definitions of green jobs, to really highlight all the jobs that don't need a STEM degree. So Project Learning Tree, which is one of the partners that implements green job programs, they do programs basically around forestry and conservation. They also identified a few key challenges. One of those was that youth don't know what a green job is, as we've kind of discussed. They don't see themselves in a green job, and they don't know how to get a green job. And I really want to highlight the second one, because I think for myself, at least when I was in high school, if I thought of someone with a green job, I kind of pictured, an engineer, a white man, in his 40s or 50s with like a hard hat and one of those like yellow vests, working on the side of like a solar panel or something like that. I definitely didn't think of like, let's say a woman of color, like working with children and educating them about climate change. But however, there are people like that doing green jobs, but it's not what we're necessarily being shown. And for a lot of folks, if you don't see yourself represented, you don't think it's possible for you to do something like that. And that's where I think the equity issues really come into play. In general, the conservation sector, when you look at the heads of different park agencies, it's very white. And, for a long time, it was very male. It's kind of starting to shift. But there are quite a few different issues for why we don't really necessarily see the diversity in the environmental sector that we should be. So, BIPOC youth, newcomers, youth from rural and remote communities, and youth with disabilities face the greatest barriers. Some of the reasons are for that are like the STEM requirement, as we've mentioned. So, for a long time, women especially were excluded from STEM, but a lot of other youth who don't have access to education because of where they live, perhaps nobody in their family has ever been to university, issues like that, that feels very, unrealistic or unattainable to them. The other big issue is around federal job programs requiring that participants be Canadian citizens, residents, or refugees. So most of the programs, except for Project Learning Tree that I assessed, do not allow international students and newcomers to be eligible. So that is a huge percentage of the youth population in Canada that is excluded. And then as someone kind of mentioned around accessibility, there's quite a few different accessibility issues. This one that I wrote refers more to the physical issues around field work, but also I know there are other issues, especially like in our kind of remote work environment that we found ourselves during COVID-19. A lot of folks can't be in front of a screen for 8 hours a day. That's not attainable for them. And so we need to make sure that there are supports in place to be able to include folks with various abilities. So that kind of perfectly leads us into the next question. So we're going to hop back to the Jamboard and discuss what kind of supports would help you get into the green fields. And you can also think of what kind of supports might help some of the communities that we were just speaking about, help them enter the environmental field more easily. Whoa, see someone reorganized the barriers section, looks great. Oh, someone's already in here. This is awesome. Thank you folks for this great participation. And again, if you have any kind of questions or thoughts as we come along, feel free to unmute yourself or ask in the chat. We'll also kind of have more of an informal general Q&A at the very end, but definitely don't hesitate to ask anything if you're confused. I really resonate with what one person said around finding jobs on social media. That's how I found my current position with Youth Climate Lab. So it's very real that I feel like more and more we're not finding positions on the usual job sites where we should be able to find them, but we're finding them on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram or what have you. So yeah, having those more easily accessible. Yeah, learning about the needs of the market and having trainings, tips for getting an interview, career counselors, how to make a job application stand out, which is very difficult when, you know, it feels like you're in huge pools of applicants, especially with jobs that are open to anyone in Canada. I've had that struggle. Yeah, the difficulties of unpaid internships. I have a real bone to pick about those, so I feel you about that. Hands-on training, provincial support, resources, websites where to look, someone with a green job who could inform me about the green fields. Yeah, these are all such great thoughts. Thank you, folks. Mentorship opportunities. That's a big one. I wouldn't be anywhere near where I am today if I had not been mentored by other environmental professionals. Oh yes, internships for mature students, and I would say other folks who are 30 and over. And I think that's one thing I probably should have mentioned earlier on in my presentation, that when I use the term youth, it is because that is what Canada defines youth as 15 to 30 or 15 to 29. And all of the green job programs that I looked at are only eligible to folks that have citizenship, residency, or refugee status who are under 30 and above 15. So it is important to talk about how also those age limits, which are a little bit, like, I don't know if you really definitively stop being a youth once you're 30. But because of those that are somewhat arbitrary, they can also exclude folks. School volunteers and job fairs. Yes, I love those. Okay, awesome. So we're going to go back to the presentation, and I'll share a little bit about what the survey respondents had to say about this question. Great. So similar to the barriers question, what I did was I provided a list of a few different supports and asked folks to rank it in the order that they most resonated with. And I think similar to how participants here were talking about experience, almost 50% of survey respondents selected that work placements and internships would be the most important support that they could have. And this really, to me, validated a lot of my research because I was looking at these programs that give you experience. Mentorship was also an important one, credentialing and upskilling, and I believe the other one is networking. And especially with networking and mentorship, those have been very complicated by being in a virtual environment. And I've spoken to youth that, they've been ghosted by mentors that they had like one call with and stuff like that, or like they'll go to virtual networking events and feel like they didn't really talk to anyone. And it was just like staring at a screen and not really having meaningful connections. So those are like, things that we are hoping to build our capacity at getting better to do those in a virtual environment in order to support more people. Yeah, and so I thought I would kind of conclude with sharing a bit about my own career path, because many people, when I tell them that my degree was in international development studies, they're kind of confused because they're like, I thought you were that environmental person, like I thought you had a green job, which I do. And so it's kind of interesting to have an arts background and how I've kind of brought that towards working in policy, working in research, and doing consulting work, but all in the realm of kind of what I call climate justice. So one thing I also like to note is you'll see a few names of organizations I've worked for in here, which my first job was in 2017, so over the past 4 years. And a lot of these were Canada Summer Jobs. Actually, all of them except Ecology Action Center and one other, DSU, the Dalhousie Student Union. All of the other ones were funded through Canada Summer Jobs. If people aren't aware, Canada Summer Jobs is a federal program that gives money to different nonprofits to hire youth over the summer. And so that is not explicitly a green job program. It's not one of the programs I look at in my research, but because it's open to nonprofits, obviously a lot of environmental nonprofits take advantage of that funding. But I think it's important to note that because I would not have near the amount of experience if I was an international student or a newcomer, because I wouldn't have been eligible for these really important experiences that I've had that have been able to build my skills and allow me to kind of get to the place I am right now in my career. So I always really want to acknowledge like the privilege that I have to be able to take advantage of these programs. And kind of talking about what I'm doing now, as I've mentioned, I work for the Emerging Youth Consultancy. And so basically that is around consulting organizations on how to integrate youth engagement into their work, but also related to environmental issues. And then with Youth Climate Lab, doing policy work around financing youth climate projects. And feel free to ask me any questions about the stuff I've done when we go to a Q&A, but that's basically the kind of end of my presentation. And I kind of just like to end going back to the Jamboard with one last thing, which is just if there's anything else you would like to know that I didn't cover, if there's something I mentioned you would like to ask me a different question about, And in general, if you have general thoughts about green jobs or things you want to share, please feel free to unmute yourself and turn your camera on, and we can have kind of more of an open discussion to end today. And I'll also mention, I think I mentioned earlier, but I'll mention again that I have a full resource list that will be emailed out to all the participants, and it includes all of the programs that I had assessed, plus a few other ones that I didn't assess that have like open, positions looking for youth. They also have like links to mentorship programs, to my report, the 2 Green Jobs podcasts that I've done, where I talk more in depth about this stuff. Yeah, there's just a bunch of resources on there because I find that all that stuff is out there, but you have to do a lot of sleuthing to find it. And so I thought I would put it all in one place to help you folks. And please feel free to share any of these materials from this workshop with other people, because just trying to spread the word. Oh, I see a question for NSCN. Dylan, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so NSCN, like I said at the beginning, we have about 30, we're up to 33 environmental organizations a part of the network. So if anyone is interested in volunteering and learning about volunteer opportunities, I will put our email address in the chat, and send us an email and we can explore some options for you. If there's a particular subject that you're interested in, we can try to find a good fit for you. Volunteering is a great way to break into the workforce. A lot of opportunities come from volunteering, and if you're passionate enough and an opportunity comes up, that organization may hire you on as a full-time staff. It has happened here at NSCN with a few volunteers in the past. So definitely volunteer as much as you can, and I will put our email address in the chat for anyone interested in some volunteer opportunities with us in any of our organizations.
Yeah, and I will say that, yeah, working for the Nova Scotia Environmental Network was a great way for me to then make connections that led to jobs further on, because the Nova Scotia Environmental Network, they have members, but the Nova Scotia Environmental Network is also a member of the Canadian Environmental Network. So that's like each province basically has their own networks. And so meeting some of the staff from the Canadian Environmental Network kind of led me to just feeling like I was very connected. And I met some people from Climate Action Network Canada. And then I started to follow all of these different networks. That's another thing I recommend, because if you follow like individual organizations, sometimes you can end up following way too many organizations. It can be a bit overwhelming. But if you follow networks for each province, for example, the network will share a job opening from one of their members, right? So that's one way to find jobs that easier, or like subscribing to their newsletter. NSCN has a great newsletter, and they'll put out job opportunities and volunteer opportunities and stuff like that.
Sabrina, I just wanted to add a few things. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
So hi, everyone. I'm Sophie. I'm the fundraising coordinator for NSCN. And you're probably going, like Sabrina said earlier, that all types of, if you work for an environmental organization, all types of jobs are green jobs. And so you're going fundraising coordinator, it's not very green, but I actually have a background in science. So I am technically a scientist. I have a BA and a BSc. So fundraising is not science, but it's helping the environment in the end. So I just wanted to mention that. And I mentioned in the chat that we do have this new volunteer hub going up. So if you guys are interested, definitely email. Dylan put the email in the chat, so definitely email us. We already have 5 or 6 of our members, and we only sent the email out like a week ago. They've already sent us multiple volunteer opportunities. Some of it's online and some of it's also like field work, like working with moose. So that like it's fun. Anyway, so that's all I have to say.
Great, thank you for that, Sophie. Totally agree. Fundraising is like the backbone of so many organizations. I'll just kind of address a few of the questions here. Do I believe that green jobs are difficult to get hired into? I feel like that's a complicated question. I think there's the perception that they are, but in my own experience, it was easier. I kind of like fell into it in a sense. So I think, I think it's a mix of being based on merit and about who you know. I believe that in order to like get an interview and stuff, especially when you're talking about those big competition pools, that's really when the networking comes in, because then your name might stand out because someone like might have heard of you before, that sort of thing. I think that that's what really helps. For a breakdown of the openings, actually, so you can actually look at the original report, which I took that figure from. So that was the 2021 EcoCanada labor market outlook. I can find it and send it along specifically, but yeah, so like EcoCanada puts out these reports on a daily basis, not daily, on a very frequent basis, because they are the Environmental Career Organization of Canada. So that's kind of their thing. So they have like very in-depth research on the labor market and like what exactly the sectors are that are requiring people. What is the best resource? There are so many resources. So that's why I'm going to send you along a resource list. Do I see the green sector becoming more tech savvy? Definitely. I mean, when you think about how Canada is investing in green jobs, most of it is in clean tech. Most of it's in clean tech, renewable energy, infrastructure. So like making sure buildings are more energy efficient and, building up public transit. And so those are all, very tech heavy jobs. But even within nonprofits, a lot of nonprofits that used to have physical offices have moved online and are now considering, are we ever going to go back to the office, with COVID, and also the costs of like maintaining a physical office and rent. So I think a lot of organizations are going to like be in a remote working environment for a long time. So I definitely see that shifting. And yeah, things are becoming more computer based. But I think there is some variation because especially jobs in conservation or any work that happens outside, COVID-19 has made a lot of people realize how important the outdoors are to them. A lot of us, we couldn't go to restaurants, we couldn't see our families, but we could go for a walk in the park, right? And so, I know organizations like Park People, they do a lot of work on urban parks. They had to move online, but now they're bringing back their in-person programming because you can't really convey the value of parks as easily if you're not physically in them. And so I think there's going to be a mix of that because I think people are craving those in-person experiences, right? Are there any green jobs involving Indigenous communities? Yes. There are quite a few programs that are targeted towards Indigenous youth or Indigenous communities in general. In kind of like the government, like for the federal election, a lot of the different parties were making promises, especially around conservation. So there's like a program called Indigenous Guardians, and there's another one called Protectors, I believe, but they're both very big programs to have Indigenous folks, working in parks, working in conservation. And there's also a few programs I know at a smaller level. There's a program called OYEP, which I think is Outdoor Youth Employment Program. And so that is helping youth get into forestry and sustainable forest management. So there is things happening at a smaller level. And I know Indigenous Climate Action and a few other organizations who are doing really important work around like decolonizing climate policy. And so bringing in more youth policymakers into government and into different, levels of policy making. So hopefully that answered your question, but I promise all of this will be linked later on. Yeah, are there any other questions? And please feel free if you want to ask directly on unmuting or whatever.
I know there was someone who was concerned about, is it necessary to pursue a master's? Like, if I don't have a master's, will that, you know, be a hurdle for me to get a job in the green sector? Because you see a lot of people who will take, you know, a Bachelor of Science or something like that, or environmental studies, and they don't go on to do a master's. Is that something that you see as kind of as a barrier? Like, do you need to get a master's? I know for me personally, I haven't gotten a master's, and I've been doing pretty well. So I don't know if it's like, if it should be an overall huge concern for most people or not.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because I did notice that comment. And similar to you, Dylan, I don't have a master's either, and I've wondered, like, should I be worried about that? I think it really depends what kind of subset of green job you want, because, like, as we've mentioned, if you are trying to get a more technical job or you know, STEM related job, you tend to need more education than the more like nonprofit jobs. I find working with nonprofits or even different, I mean, I think government is a huge bucket of positions. So again, you could be a STEM person working in government, you could be a policy person working in government. But let's just stick to nonprofits. I think nonprofits are looking for people with diverse set of skills and people that are kind of like a Jack or Jill of all trades. So they want someone that can problem solve, that has kind of like might have an interdisciplinary degree or background. They have like holistic thinking, critical thinking skills, and can really, you know, troubleshoot. And they might not be an expert in climate science, but they know enough to be able to implement it in the ways it's needed. And so they're kind of like, they have more generalized knowledge rather than really specialized. I feel like now more and more these days, there's more people that are getting jobs with generalized knowledge rather than like 3 degrees on a very specific type of research. But again, it really depends what you want to do. So I think, you know, one of the things I tell people is figure out like what you really care about, but also what your skills are and what you love to do. And then you can figure out how to make a green job out of that, because there are so many green jobs. So for me, I love talking to people. I love research. I love policy. So that's what I focus on. I'm not going to try to, like do an engineering degree and, you know, try to build a wind turbine. But someone else might love to do that. It's the same thing with things like art. I think art has a huge role to play in the green field, and art can have such a big impact on social and environmental change and motivating people to take action. And so I believe, you know, if you have a talent or skill or love, don't think that that means you can't have a green job. You just might need to think a bit out of the box about how to implement that. Yeah, I see in the comments there, yeah, Cass was saying, profs started saying stuff like a bachelor's degree is the new kind of high school degree. And that's like a real thing that was also something we talked about at CCYP. There's like what they call kind of like the over proliferation of bachelor's degrees. So like what used to be a leg up above the competition is no longer a leg up in that sense. So again, that's why I think, you know, building on your passions and your own diversification of skills, that's actually what's going to differentiate you. Not that you have 3 degrees, because a lot of people have 3 degrees now, if that makes sense. But, you know, someone who has 3 degrees but doesn't really care about what they're doing versus someone who has a lot of maybe lived experience, a lot of passion, a lot of new ideas. I feel like that person's a lot more of an attractive candidate for some organizations. but yeah, like, I mean, I think, I don't know if it was quite a question or a comment, but as far as honors, I do have an honors degree. And I will say that that has helped me in my research pathway. But again, not everyone wants to go into research. Oh no, Sophie. Well, you're here now. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything else in here in the chat. But these are all just my opinions on it. You know, a lot of different, you know, economists and, you know, employment experts will have different takes. This is kind of just what I've learned from my own experience, but also talking to a lot of other youth who are going through these same challenges, especially in a post-COVID world. So. I will also mention that if there's anything else you wanted to mention, or like it could be feedback for me, it could be feedback for NSEN. There's one more slide on here. The last slide's actually blank, the sixth one, so don't worry about that. There's one more slide that's just any other questions or comments. And so that can be about eco evenings generally, about what I do, but feel free to add that. Thank you for your question, Autumn. So Autumn asked, do you think that most youth have to move away to get a green job? So this is something I didn't address, but so thank you so much for bringing it up. This is again another, I think it's a both perception and it's both a reality as well for some communities. And when I talked about how youth from remote and rural communities face a lot of barriers, there's a few reasons for that. So a lot of remote and rural communities are very dependent on fossil fuel usage. Maybe the fossil fuel industry employs most of the city or the town. They also have issues with digital access, not good internet, so working remotely can be more difficult. So all of those reasons are, you know, create challenges. One thing that the government is doing is trying to create like what we call a just transition, or a just transition to a low carbon economy. They did a task force to kind of investigate and talk with fossil fuel communities about how to best support them to move to low carbon work. But my concern with the work that has been done is that it's very focused on the current fossil fuel workers and not so much maybe their kids or their grandkids in the community. And current fossil fuel workers tend to be, you know, middle-aged white men, and tend to actually, you know, be fairly, you know, middle to upper income, right? And so they're again quite privileged, and something that Hadrian, who is the he's one of the policy specialists for the Canadian Council for Policy Alternatives, Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, he interviewed him, and one of the things that he mentioned is that those whole industries, they have, you know, people who are the janitors, they have like the daycare for the kids of the fossil fuel workers, they have people making food, and those tend to be, you know, racialized folks, women, immigrants, and we're not really necessarily concerning ourselves with what are they going to do if we shut down the oil fields, you know, where are they going to do if this coal mine is closed, what jobs are they going to have? So I think related to that, we need to really be thinking about how we're creating jobs in those places, not expecting everyone to move, because that's a huge issue. And we know that with Indigenous communities too, a lot of youth feel like they must leave their reserve or community and go to an urban area in order to get a job. And then they feel very disconnected from their community, they're isolated, you know, it leads to a lot of issues. And so we really need to be focusing on, yeah, these more distant communities. How are we creating jobs there, and not only jobs that rely on digital access, because we know that that is something that's also a problem. So I don't necessarily have the answer for that, but that's what I'm hoping as we're moving along with creating a bill around just transition, or it's a Just Transition Act that we're trying to get into Parliament, that those considerations are more incorporated into that. Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, so the additional resources will have like links to mentorship programs. the actual green job program. So you can actually see all of the employers who are receiving wage subsidies right now to hire youth, and you can apply to them. You'll find different like workshops, webinars, Good Work, which is a green jobs site that you can search on. Like I mentioned, my report, I have 2 podcasts I've spoken about these issues. And yeah, I hope that answered your question. Great. Well, really appreciate all this participation. Aw, I love all the support here as well. It's so nice whenever I'm interacting with folks in Nova Scotia, I feel that community feeling. Awesome. Well, I think we'll wrap it up as we're at the hour. But like, as I've said, you'll have all the resources, and please feel free to contact me with any questions. I'll actually just slip in my email in the chat, but also folks can add me on LinkedIn if you're on LinkedIn. I often will be like sharing green jobs just on my LinkedIn for anyone to apply to. And I usually highlight green jobs that are open to youth specifically. So that's a great option. And yeah, really appreciate your participation and tuning in today. Do you have any other closing words, Dylan?
No, thanks so much everyone for joining, and it's really insightful. And yeah, send us an email and we'll do our best to help you out. And if you want to go on to our website and check out our membership list, I do encourage that everyone, if you're on Facebook, to go. It takes a bit of time, may take you a couple hours to search up each organization, but follow them on Facebook. That's something that I've done in the past, and it's a good way to stay on top of some opportunities because they're not always posted on the job bank or other places. A lot of these jobs are often posted on social media. So follow as many environmental organizations as you can on social media, and apply, and volunteering is a great way to get some experience, and so yeah, and build up your resume. But yeah, I think that's it. Thanks so much, everyone, and hope everyone has a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.